General audience number 101 of December 1st, 1982. We have analyzed Ephesians, and above all, chapter 5, verses 22 to 33, in the perspective of the sacramentality of marriage. Now we will try to consider the same text once again in the light of the words of the gospel and the letters of Paul to the Corinthians and the Romans. As a sacrament born of the mystery of the redemption, and in some sense reborn from the spousal love of Christ and the church, marriage is an efficacious expression of the saving power of God, who realizes his eternal plan also after sin, and despite the threefold concupiscence hidden in the heart of every man, male and female. As a sacramental expression of that saving power, marriage is also an exhortation to gain mastery over concupiscence, as Christ speaks about in the Sermon on the Mount. A fruit of this mastery is the unity and indissolubility of marriage, and in addition, the deepened sense of the woman's dignity in the man's heart, as also the man's dignity in the woman's heart, in conjugal life together, and in every other sphere of reciprocal relations. The truth according to which marriage, as sacrament of redemption, is given to the man of concupiscence as a grace and at the same time as an ethos, has found particular expression in the teaching of St. Paul as well, especially in 1 Corinthians chapter 7. When he compares marriage with virginity, or continence for the kingdom of heaven, and declares the superiority of virginity, he still observes, quote, each has his own gift from God, one in one way and another in another. 1 Corinthians chapter 7, verse 7. Thus, based on the mystery of redemption, a particular gift, that is, grace, corresponds to marriage. In the same context, when the apostle gives advice to the recipients of his letter, he recommends marriage because of the danger of incontinence, 1 Corinthians chapter 7, verse 2. And a little later, he recommends to the spouses that, quote, the husbands should give to his wife her due, and likewise the wife to her husband, 1 Corinthians chapter 7, verse 3. And he continues, quote, it is better to marry than to be a flame, 1 Corinthians chapter 7, verse 9. On the basis of these Pauline statements, the opinion was formed that marriage is a specific remedium concupiscentiae, as we were able to observe that a particular gift corresponds to marriage, and that in the mystery of redemption, marriage is given to the man and the woman as grace. Simply expresses the thought in his words, suggestive and paradoxical as they are, that marriage is assigned to spouses as an ethos. In the Pauline words, quote, it is better to marry than to be a flame, the word aflame signifies the disorder of the passions springing from concupiscence of the flesh. Concupiscence is presented as an analogous way in the Old Testament by Sirach chapter 23, verse 17. See TOB audience number 39, paragraph 1. Marriage, by contrast, signifies the ethical order, which is consciously introduced in this context. One can say that marriage is the place of the encounter of eros and ethos, and of their reciprocal interpenetration in the heart of man and woman, and likewise in all their reciprocal relations. Sacrament, call to life according to the Spirit. In addition, this truth, namely that marriage as a sacrament springing from the mystery of redemption is given to historical man as both a grace and an ethos, determines the character of marriage as one of the sacraments of the Church. As a sacrament of the Church, marriage is by nature indissoluble. As a sacrament of the Church, it is also a word of the Spirit, exhorting man and woman to shape their whole life together by drawing strength from the mystery of the redemption of the body. In this way, they are called to chastity, as to the state of life according to the Spirit proper to them. See Romans chapter 8, verses 4 to 5, and Galatians chapter 5, verse 25. The redemption of the body also signifies, in this case, the hope that can be defined in the dimension of marriage as the everyday hope, the hope of temporality. On the basis of such a hope, one can master the concupiscence of the flesh as the source of the tendency toward an egotistical satisfaction, and in the sacramental covenant of masculinity and femininity, Flesh itself becomes the specific substratum of a lasting and indissoluble communion of persons, communio personarum, in a manner worthy of persons. Those who unite with each other as spouses according to the eternal divine plan, so as to become in some sense one flesh, are in turn called by the sacrament to a life according to the Spirit, such that this life corresponds to the gift received in the sacrament. In virtue of this gift, by leading a life as spouses according to the Spirit, they are able to discover the particular gratuitous gift in which they have come to share. Just as concupiscence darkens the horizon of interior vision and deprives hearts of the lucid clarity of desires and aspirations, so life according to the Spirit, or the grace of the sacrament of marriage, allows man and woman to find the true freedom of the gift together with the awareness of the spousal meaning of the body and its masculinity and femininity. Thus, life according to the Spirit expresses itself also in the reciprocal union or knowledge. See Genesis chapter 4, verse 1, by which the spouses, when they become one flesh, submit their femininity and masculinity to the blessing of procreation. Quote, Adam united himself with Eve, his wife, who conceived and gave birth, and said, quote, I have acquired a man from the Lord. Genesis chapter 4, verse 1. Here, too, life according to the Spirit expresses itself in the awareness of the gratuitous gift, which corresponds to the dignity of the spouses themselves as parents. That is, it expresses itself in the deep awareness of the holiness of the life sacrum, to which both give rise, thereby participating in the powers of the mystery of creation, like the first parents. In the light of that hope, which is connected with the mystery of the redemption of the body, see Romans chapter 8, verses 19 to 23, this new human life, the new human being conceived and born from the conjugal union of his father and mother, opens himself to the first fruits of the Spirit. Romans chapter 8, verse 23, to enter into the freedom of the glory of the children of God. Romans chapter 8, verse 21. And if the whole creation groans and suffers until now in labor pains, Romans chapter 8, verse 22, a particular hope accompanies the mother's labor pains, namely, the hope of the revelation of the sons of God, a hope of which every newborn who comes into the world carries a spark with himself. Sacrament and the eschatological hope of the redemption of the body. This hope, which is in the world, penetrating, as St. Paul teaches, the whole of creation, is at the same time not from the world. Even more, it must fight in the human heart against what is from the world, with what is in the world. For all that is in the world, the concupiscence of the flesh, of the concupiscence of the eyes, and the pride of life, comes not from the Father, but from the world. 1 John chapter 2, verse 16. As the primordial sacrament, and at the same time as the sacrament born in the mystery of the redemption of the body from the spousal love of Christ and the Church, marriage comes from the Father. It is not from the world, but from the Father. Consequently, as a sacrament, marriage also constitutes the basis of hope for the person, for the man and the woman, for the parents and the children, for the human generations. On the one hand, the world passes away with its concupiscence. On the one hand, the world, and on the other, the one who does the will of God will remain in eternity. 1 John chapter 2, verse 17. Man's origin in the world is linked with marriage as a sacrament, and his coming to be is inscribed in marriage, not only in the historical but also in the eschatological dimensions. This is what, quote, the words in which Christ appeals to the resurrection of the body refer to. Words reported by the three synoptics. See Matthew chapter 2, verse 23 to 32, Mark chapter 12, verse 18 to 27, and Luke chapter 20, verses 34 to 39. In the resurrection they take neither wife nor husband, but are like angels in heaven, as Matthew puts it. And Mark likewise. While Luke has, quote, the sons of this age take wife and take husband, but those who are considered worthy of the other world and of the resurrection from the dead take neither wife nor husband. Indeed, they cannot die any more, because they are equal to the angels, and being sons of the resurrection, they are sons of God. Luke chapter 20, verses 34 to 36. We analyzed these texts earlier in detail. Christ affirms that marriage, the sacrament of the origins of man in the visible temporal world, does not belong to the eschatological reality of the future world. Nevertheless, the man who is called to participate in this eschatological future through the resurrection of the body is the same man, male and female, whose origin in the visible temporal world is linked with marriage as the primordial sacrament of the very mystery of creation. Even more, every man called to share in the reality of the future resurrection carries this vocation in the world because he has his origin in the visible temporal world through the marriage of his parents. Thus, Christ's words, which exclude marriage from the reality of the future world, at the same time indirectly reveal the meaning of the sacrament for the participation of human persons, sons and daughters, in the future resurrection. Marriage, which is the primordial sacrament, reborn in some sense from the spousal love of Christ in the church, does not belong to the redemption of the body in the dimension of eschatological hope. See Romans chapter 8, verse 23. The same marriage, which is given to man as a grace, as a gift destined by God precisely for the spouses, and at the same time assigned to them by Christ's words as an ethos, that sacramental marriage is fulfilled and realized in the perspective of the eschatological hope. It has an essential meaning for the redemption of the body in the dimension of this hope. It comes, in fact, from the Father and owes its origin in the world to Him. And if this world passes away, and if the concupiscence of the flesh, the concupiscence of the eyes, and the pride of life, which comes from the world, also pass away with it, marriage as a sacrament immutably serves the purpose that man, male and female, by mastering concupiscence, does the will of the Father, and the one who does the will of God will remain in eternity. 1 John chapter 2, verse 17. In this sense, marriage as a sacrament also bears within itself the germ of man's eschatological future. That is the perspective of the redemption of the body in the dimension of eschatological hope, to which Christ's words about the resurrection correspond. Quote, "In the resurrection they take neither wife nor husband." Matthew chapter 22, verse 30. Moreover, those who, quote, "being sons of the resurrection are equal to the angels and sons of God." Luke chapter 20, verse 36. Owe their origin in the visible temporal world to the marriage and procreation of man and woman. As a sacrament of the human beginning, as a sacrament of the temporality of historical man, marriage thus performs an irreplaceable service with regard to man's extra-temporal future, with regard to the mystery of the redemption of the body in the dimension of eschatological hope.